will address those questions. And yes, I just forgot to record, so I'm just started recording. So I'll just welcome you again, Pinchas Shiel, who will address us tonight on his story from altar boy to Aleph. So without further ado, Pinchas, we hand over to you. And once again, a big thank you for joining us tonight here in South Caulfield and in Melbourne, Australia.
It's a pleasure. It feels weird to be doing this talk like this. I suppose, the technology allows us to go international. I'm going to start off by almost like undermining myself a little bit away. I'm not the son of an archbishop. I'm not the grandson of a Nazi. So my story, I think, to me is kind of very prosaic. It's not that special. But I've been asked to tell it, so I'll tell it, which is fine. I'm happy to do that. I'm going to start off by saying my parents came from Ireland in the 1960s and emigrated to South Africa. One of the great exports of Ireland at that stage was all its university graduates, because it was a very poor country and didn't have enough jobs for its graduates. So my dad had a choice between Canada and South Africa, and he said he didn't particularly like the idea of 7 to 8 months of snow or freezing weather a year. So he came to sunny South Africa in the 1960s. It's kind of like you'll see I'll draw the theme as we're talking along about kind of weird ironies, and we all have ironies in our life. And the kind of irony was my mother was a member of the Irish anti-apartheid movement, boycotted pineapples and all those kind of things, but yet moved to South Africa in the time of H.F. Foot, who was the architect of apartheid. So it's these kind of weird ironies. My parents were very staunch Irish Catholics. So those of you who have read Angela's Ashes may have a little bit of an idea of what might be an Irish Catholic. Generally, a friend of mine used to joke that the only theocracy west of Warsaw was Dublin. And that gives you an idea that in Ireland, I'm sure the rabbi will bemoan that this is not his lot, but in those days, the priests of your parish priest was the ultimate power. What he said went. And if you didn't obey, you got read out from the pulpit. So in those days, it was a very down the line, dare I use the word machpid, but you were very orthodox in your practice. In South Africa, my brothers and my sister were all born here. And we had what was basically called a Catholic home. Religion and spirituality were very much the focus of our lives. We went to Catholic schools in Pretoria. I live in Johannesburg now, but I grew up in Pretoria, and I went to CBC, Christian Brothers College, also known as Child Beaters College or City Bum Cleaners, depending on what school you came from in Pretoria. You would use one of those names for my school, but they definitely believed in spare the rod and spoil the child. We got beaten black and blue. So I've always had a joke saying if by any chance I should ever be made the Pope, I would restart the Inquisition and set them on the CBC brothers. That'd be my childhood trauma resolved. But in the evenings, I think the TV news was 7:30 or 8 o'clock or something. My dad we'd be sitting in the lounge, we'd watch the highlights, the headlines, and then TV gets switched off, and out would come the Bible. There'd be prayers, things like that, prayers for intentions for people to get better, those kind of things. That's the kind of house we were in. Went to mass weekly. My brothers and I were in catechism until we were 16. Very much lived our religion, as it were. By the time we got to high school, my brothers and I begged our parents to take us out of the Catholic school system, and we went to the local government school near our house, and probably the happiest days of my life in school. I hated school, but those were the better years. We were kind of, in the neighborhood we lived in is a small, it's now a suburb. In those days, it was a village called Irene. And they were always we always called ourselves the Independent Republic of Irene. It was a very WASP area. And there were maybe 4 Catholic families, so we were very much the minority. Jews, it was a Uden Rhine area. There were no Jews. There was a Jewish community in Pretoria, and they didn't stretch to Irene. So growing up, there was no awareness of Jews or Judaism or anything like that at all. So get to high school, get to the end of high school, it's now the dreaded career choice time. You have to make a career choice. What are your choices? I had no idea what I wanted to do. And in grade 11, the year before I left school, I think it was grade 11 or 12, I went as a youth representative to a conference in the Catholic Church in Pretoria for what they called vocations, trying to encourage people to become priests or nuns or brothers in the church. And there was a keynote speaker there. His name is Father Albert Nolan, and he was what's called a Dominican. I was very taken by him. He was a very good speaker. He was very inspiring. And I thought to myself, that's what I'd like to do. So that's what we set up. I made contact with their vocations director, and he did me the biggest favor of my life ever. He said, I was 17 when I finished school. He said, "You're a bit young." I think what he wanted to say nicely was immature and callow and all the rest of it. But he said, maybe we need to go to university first, go and do a degree, and then we'll talk about a vocation afterwards. So I went to the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, an English-speaking university, and I moved into the Dominican house in a suburb called Mayfair, which was a very working-class area at the time, as what's called a postulant. So I'd live in the house as if I was a member of the community, but I wouldn't be under any vows or anything like that. And every day I walked up to Wits, and it was very exciting because very much that was the time in the Catholic Church of what was called liberation theology, which was a very kind of Marxist-informed theology and very much about justice and fighting oppression and fighting oppressive regimes. And I was 17. This was very exciting. The house was, our phones were regularly by the security branch. We had people shooting bullets through our windows. We had two anti-apartheid head offices on the ground floor of our building. So it was a very, let's say, a heady space to be in. And for a 17-year-old, this was such an exciting adventure. And then I went to Wits. This was in the mid-'80s, and it was a very hot political period. Lots of activism on campus, police regularly invading the campus, shooting tear gas. For me, this was just, wow, living life. Maybe getting a degree as well, but this was part of it. I was part of the Catholic Student Society, CathSoc, also very kind of left-wing leaning, very guided by ideas of justice. And these are the kind of things that informed me. And there's a reason I'm telling you this, just to set the foundation for what comes after, because funny enough, this did form part of the foundation for where I end up today. Liberation, the people who were very involved in kind of left-wing anti-apartheid Christians were very, very, very taken by the books of the Nevi'im, the prophets. So the books of Isaiah, Jeremiah, books talking about fighting, not to oppress your worker, describing oppressive leaders, what they're not allowed to do. These kind of things were these were things that inspired us and guided us and led us. And I was very taken with that. Sorry. In my second year, again, one of these weird ironies, I made friends with a guy who was a Harry K, who was a Jewish boy. Shaved head, saffron robes, the works that came onto Wits, they were missionizing. And he introduced me to, to a librarian of a very special collection of books in the university in a library system called the Landau Collection. It had been set up by the first chief rabbi of South Africa. His books had formed the seed of this library. And it was a great library to be in because you had to have a card to get in. It was a closed library. And I don't know if it's the same at university in Australia, but for us to find a place where you could study or sit down and do work was a premium. So this library was fantastic. It had wooden desks, beautiful chairs. It had a very academic feel to it, beautiful Jewish books, floor-to-ceiling books all around. And he introduced me to the librarian. She was one of these absolutely amazing characters. She was an Israeli, but like in her 80s, dripping in diamonds, tanned, very a Tel Aviv woman, absolute character, really strong person. And I got a card to this library because she made friends with me. And for me, it was, again, one of those things, you get this little thing in your life that kind of shifts the trajectory of your life, like just 0.1 degree. But over a period of time, it moves and it shifts and it goes, oh, thanks, love. My wife on her computer heard me coughing. So, a couple of years later, you find yourself a lot further away from where you started. It kind of sets you off. And this is one of those things that kind of started a 0.1 degree change in a trajectory for me. I was very taken by the books, the Hebrew script. Couldn't read Hebrew, not at all. Couldn't understand the books, but was just an amazing place to be. And that started me on a process of reading. I started reading about other religions and that kind of thing. In my third year, I met, who is now my best friend, who now lives in Sydney, my best friend Joel, came to university. He'd grown up in a Jewish household in a suburb called Victory Park, gone to King David, the main Jewish school, and come to Wits. And he'd made friends with, made friends with a friend of mine, and she came to me and said, listen, this guy's driving me crazy. He's asking me questions I can't answer. And please, can you talk to him? So we sat down and we had a discussion. And in my mind, it felt like, when I later on read in history, those great debates between the rabbis and the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal, because I felt like I was personally held responsible for the Shoah, for any pogrom that had ever done in Russia, Chmielniki, every bad thing that ever happened to the Jewish people was suddenly my responsibility. And I was saying to him, like, what are you talking about? I'm an Irish Catholic. It's not a national identity. The Irish have never oppressed anybody. They're a bunch of nothings, you know, like, what are you talking about? Catholicism is a religion. You know, and through that discussion, we kind of found what it meant, what a Jewish identity was, how a Jew saw themselves in history, how I saw myself in history. And Joel and I became good friends, and he became a little bit too friendly with all the my Catholic friends, and his parents were very smart people, got a little bit worried. So what they did on his birthday was, they said to him one night, invite them for Friday night supper. So about 8 of us arrived at his house for Shabbos dinner. And again, one of those weird little moments where you just starts changing the trajectory again. Something about that meal left its mark on me. It wasn't about the close familyness. I'm from a very close family. It was just, there was something about it that struck me. Didn't understand half of it. Certainly the benching felt like it took 2 hours. Now I can bench in 2 minutes flat. But it was something that happened there and started me talking and reading. And I'd graduated, I got my BA, and I went and worked at the public library and for a year, and decided, you know what, I never gave the Dominicans a proper chance, because after my first year at university, I'd left. I moved out of the house and went back home. I'd never actually given them a proper chance, so I decided I was going to enter. So I went in as what's called the novice. I went and lived in Maseru in Lesotho. They had the novitiate there. That's where your first year is. And we lived pretty much a monastic life. The novices were up. We were up at 4:30 in the morning. We were in chapel at 5. We did an hour of meditation. The rest of the house would come in at 6. There'd be meditation. And then they would have morning prayers every day. And it was very interesting for me to later on realize how much of the structure of what they do is actually taken from the service in the Beis Hamikdash. The service of the Levi'im, the singing backwards and forwards, that kind of thing is very much what they do. People look at Gregorian chant and they think it's beautiful, but they don't actually realize kind of what the foundation of it is. A lot of that has been taken out of the service in the Beis Hamikdash. So I remember my therapist said to me, I have authority issues. And all my authority issues came to the fore during my time in my novitiate. My novice master and I clashed pretty much on a daily basis. But I was reading and reading. And after 8 months, I remember I was in chapel one morning and the priest held up the host, the bread for communion, and said, body of Christ. And I thought, no, not. That was a Tuesday. By Thursday, I was back in Johannesburg. On the Wednesday, I phoned my friend Joel from Lesotho and said, I'm coming back to Johannesburg and I'm going to be converting to Judaism. And he said, what, are you nuts? Are you crazy? Why would you do this? It was absolutely, he thought I was just bananas. Anyway, I wasn't going to be deterred. I came back to Johannesburg. I moved into an apartment in a suburb called Yeovil, which was a very Jewish suburb in its day, and still was at that stage, but it was also the place a lot of university students would also live in communes and take flats. And I went to the local Beth Din, and I went to see a rabbi called Rabbi Bender. South Africans will remember him. He was a very, very, very memorable character. And he'd said to me, he said, look, they've had bad experiences converting students. They need people who are working, who are settled in their lives before they're even going to look at me. So my first job is to get integrated into the Jewish community. I said, okay. And I thought, being the chacham that I am, I joined his community. I thought, okay, I'll show you. I joined his Shule, Yeovil Shule, which was, I found out afterwards, it's called the Gera Shule. Most of the people who are converting joined his Shule because it tended to go a lot faster. And I was living in my flat, and I started to go to Shul on Shabbos, started kind of keeping Shabbos, was doing reading, went to the local Chabad house because they had a kashrut course, and then they sent a guy around, and after I'd done the course, they sent a guy to my house to kasher. Actually, later on, I did my military service. He was my chaplain, but he came to kasher my house. And again, one of those weird ironies. It's kind of like one of those "you got to be Jewish" moments. At 10 o'clock my house was kosher. 12 o'clock when I made lunch, it was now all treif. Because of bishul akum, and a non-Jew cooks in a Jewish kitchen, it makes everything treif. So everything was kosher style for a couple of years. My poor brother came and shared a flat with me and had to be vegetarian for a number of years. But I continued with that. I did my honors and my master's in psychology. I'm a clinical psychologist. And all of this was about a 10-year period. I did my internship, and then I contacted Rabbi Bender again. He was still in charge of conversions, and said, okay, come, put me in your book. He has a register. He had to put you in. And the minute you're in the register, the clock started ticking. So he put me in his book. And at that stage, I was looking for a place to live. I just finished my internship. And my best friend, Joel, said to me, you know what? Why don't he'd won a green card to America. He said, I've never lived out of home. Why don't you and I share a place so I can get used to living by myself, independent living? I said, cool. So we found a flat in a suburb called Ilovo, which was kind of a compromise because he didn't want to be too much in what we call the Jewish area of the ghetto area. But I also needed to be near kind of more kind of from a Shules. The idea was I was going to walk to the local Shule called Waverley. But we found a flat at the top of one major road. And then I realized after we'd signed the lease that the Shule was at the bottom of that road on the other side of the highway. And it was at least a 30-minute walk on a Friday night, 45-minute walk to get home. So that was not a good idea. So I said to somebody said, no, there's a Shule around the corner. So I went around to the Shule. This was Chabad of Ilovo. And I met the Rabbi Katz, to this day as my Rav, and settled in at that Shul. I went on Friday night. I went afterwards and said to him, this is what I'm doing. And he said, fine, you're very welcome to come here. And it was I was at that Shul for about 12 years before I got married and moved to a different part of Johannesburg. And it was in those years, I wouldn't say I was a Ben Bayit in my rabbi's house, but I spent a lot of time then, learned a lot about being from Yid, from being in that house, learned about Pesach, learned about Chagim, how these work. I used to go to Shul in the morning. So the davening started at 20 to 7. So I would go at 6 o'clock. And I would I'd learned Aleph base myself. I taught myself. So what I would do is I'd start davening. And I'd work my way through the Siddur. And when the Shul arrived to daven, I was, in the beginning, it wasn't that far ahead. And slowly it got further and further ahead as I got more fluent. And then I would daven in Hebrew until they caught up with me, and then I'd switch to English. And as time went by, it kind of got more and more. Somebody had said to me at that time, something I took to heart. They said, if you want to be part of the core membership of the community, you need to go to the morning minyan. Before that, I hadn't really gone to morning minyans. It was more like just going on Shabbos and things like that. And I, through that, actually became a real core part of the community. I was part of the core community and was included in stuff. And that for me was a very special time because I was very much included and looked after. People wanted to make sure I had a place to go for Shabbos. Learned my Yiddishkeit. It started on the conversion program with a rabbi in Johannesburg. I joined. Rabbi Ron Hendler was running a conversion program now for the Beth Din, where they were teaching people in classes. They'd switched a whole new system. And we were learning and learning and learning. And after 18 months, I got to the point where I was told, okay, I can go to the Beth Din. So I did. And that was quite a big thing because I had to not very much in my mind digest, why was I doing this? I'd had very generous people along the way. Joel's family had been amazing to me. They lived in Victory Park. And at that stage, Victory Park was a very full shul. In fact, on the Yamim Noraim, on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, they used to have overflow services. But his parents always made sure I had a seat in Shul with them. I sat with their family in Shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They always made sure that if I needed a place at Pesach, I could come to them. I wasn't Jewish. I was a nice guy. They always did this. They were the most amazing people. And I'd met people like this had come into my life. So I got to the Beth Din and I had to work out, why am I doing this? I have to be able to give them a cogent, succinct explanation of why I don't want to do this. Because they're there to obviously push back a little bit, to test me and to push back and see why I don't want to do this. Am I for real? And the South African Beth Din, I don't know about other Beth Din, but in South Africa, a singleton coming for conversion is usually viewed with a lot of suspicion. If you're coming for marriage, although this is not the normal way of doing it, kind of psychologically, they feel at least you've got a connection to the community and to a family. I'm sitting and I'm by myself. Who am I? So that was why Rabbi Bender said, integrate into the Jewish community. And I remember it was kind of a funny thing. Joel's friends a couple of years couldn't believe I wasn't Jewish. I might look like an Irish hooligan, but I had the lingo, I'd learned the subtleties. You know, you can pick up when someone's around and they're not Jewish. I was comfortable. I knew how to speak, what to do, where to be. I picked up the patois, as you might say. And so often, the funny thing was they always looked at Joel and said, "It's so weird. He's the latter-day Canaanite, and I'm the guy who's a from Yid." It was one of those kind of, again, one of those weird Jewish stories. So when I went to the Beth Din, we did the normal thing. I got tested, asked questions about halachas and things like that, tried not to trip up too much. And finally they said to me, "Why are you doing this?" And what I explained to them was something I'd learned from my rabbi, and it was important to me, was that when I'd come out of my years at Wits, fighting against apartheid and trying to get change, I'd left very disillusioned. Like, we really made no difference, actually. I think we raised awareness. I'm being too harsh, maybe I'm being unfair, but it just felt to me like we hadn't really made any difference. The apartheid government was in full storm, and at the end, apartheid wasn't wiped out by the Wits students. It was a whole lot of other things. And I felt disillusioned. Like, I'd grown up in a family where it was about charity, trying to make the world a better place. How do you improve things? And that had always been a guiding thing in my family. And for me, what I'd come to the conclusion was, it's about the 613 mitzvot, that when we're keeping mitzvahs, we are partners with Hashem in creation. We're doing what we're supposed to do. We're helping. We're Hashem's assistants. And this is what brings meaningful change into the world. And that as long as we're doing these things, and that's what I was committing myself to. And that was the argument I made, and I'm not convinced them because I'm here with a beard and a yarmulke. But it is a thing by which I kind of live my life. So, I mean, it sounds stupid to say it, and I'm not trying to be boastful or present false modesty. It's more just to give an example, is at night, I'll remind myself, before I eat my supper, it's a positive mitzvah to feed my animals. We've got dogs. I need to feed my dogs. And when I feed my dogs, I remind myself that's why I'm doing it. One, because I want to feed the dogs, but two, also what's the order of feeding them is they get fed before I do, because that's the mitzvah. So that's kind of how I try to do it. So getting up in the morning sometimes for Shule, especially in winter, can be particularly hectic. But I get up and do it. I must say, in the lockdown, I've realized how much I miss my minyan. It really has like hammered into me how valuable it is for me. Why am I learning? Sometimes I can sit with an art scroll Gemara and I feel like I'm chewing bricks, but I'm doing something positive. I'm doing something to partner with Hashem. And that's what I try and do. So in Israel, I went to Israel for the first time in 2007. I was in my mid-30s, and it was mind-blowing. I learned about Hashgacha Pratit in the biggest possible way. It was just the most, I was there by myself. I didn't really know anybody. I knew nobody. I had one friend who was at Osamech Yeshiva, and I hooked up with him on my first day. I would go down in the morning, I'd daven the sunrise, the Nate's Minyan at the Kotel. I was living in a small backpackers lodge on Jaffa near Kikar Tzion, and I'd walk down to the Kotel, and I would daven there, and I'd walk back. I'd pick up 2 fruit juices and 2 Ola ice creams, because they're Chalaf Israel and they're kosher in South Africa. They're not. Treif, and it was like, that was my breakfast. That was breakfast for 2 weeks. I actually lost 15 kilograms, by the way. I'm going to write a book about how if you eat gut juice and 2 ice creams a day, and you can lose a lot of weight. I'm going to wipe out banting and paleo. It's all about walking. I walked Jerusalem flat. But it was mind-blowing. Everywhere I went, if you needed something, I was going to Tzfat for there's a place called the Ascent Institute, and I was going for their last Shabbos program of the summer, because it was in September. And I timed my trip to Israel for Elul. For me, it was kind of like I was going to use this as a pilgrimage to kind of prepare for Rosh Hashanah. So I went up and I walked up to the Takana, the bus station. And of course, guess what? There's only one person at the info counter, and she don't speak no English. So we kind of worked out, go here. 2 weeks before, when I got to Israel, I'd arrived at midnight. I'd arrived at midnight, 11 o'clock. Got to Jerusalem at midnight. I was starving. You got these hechshes, you know what to eat. I was starving. I got to my friend at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at Osamech. So again, I went to the bus station and didn't know which. I said to the guy, "I need to get to this place. How do I?" They gave me a bus number. I went and stood there. Now I'd started doing Ulpan in Johannesburg, and I'd learned. Slicha, ani lo medaber ivrit. Ani Talmid Bekita Aleph Pan Johannesburg, and that's as I'm hoping to God. They go, "You know what? Let me help you out. You know, like the French do. Please, God, for God's sake, speak English. You know, don't stop butchering the language." And so I say to this guy, and he goes, "Oh, where are you from?" I said, "Johannesburg. Where are you from?" He says, "Cape Town." So he says, where are you going to? I said, Rosamerk Yeshiva. He said, okay, I'm going 3 blocks past there. Come with me. And we got on the bus and off we go. And he showed me. The funny thing was I bumped into him about 9 years later. I didn't remember him. And he didn't remember. He sat at a Shiva Brockers and said, I know you. And finally said, oh, the bus station, Rosamerk. And it was the same guy. So he's a rabbi that I now know and very friendly with. So it's these weird things. So I get to the bus station. I can read enough Hebrew to try and read Tzfat. And I cannot see the bus station for Tzfat. So I do the slicha, blah, 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 and I get a guy who goes, humph. Was the only guy who didn't react well to my attempts. Anyway, I'm not going to put an American accent. I can't, but this big gazunta guy comes out from the bus station and says, are you going to Tzfat? I said, yeah, I am. He said, it's over here. Get on the bus. We end up sitting next to each other. He says, where are you going to? I said, the Ascent Institute. He says, oh, really? He says, my name's Mo Ziv. I'm called Big Mo. I'm the director of English programs at the Institute. Like, come on. How do these things happen? Had an amazing time there. Went to the Rambam's cave, Rabbi Akiva's cave. My parents looked at my photo album and said, geez, you went to a lot of graveyards. Why? The Arizal, like went to all these kebarim to daven. And then from there, went straight to New York to the Lubavitcher Rivers Ohel. I am a Lubavitcher Chassid these days. So that was important to me. And at that stage, I went to a place called Amukah outside Tzfat to daven for Shidduch. I'm watching the time, so I'm going to wrap it up so I can questions. And it was a very surreal experience, davening for a thing, but I didn't realize at that stage there was a woman in Durban. She'd come up to Johannesburg and she was moaning to her cousin's wife. She can't find a guy. She's crying, these guys in Durban are terrible. She's been through everybody. She can't find a thing. And her cousin said to her, write a letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which she did, put it into a book, and then we never heard about it again. That was it. The funny thing was we worked out the timing. I think it was roughly the time I was in Israel. I went to New York. I davened at the Rivers Ohel, also davened for Shidduch, came home. This was September. We actually met in November. A friend of ours, a common friend of ours, introduced us at his birthday. And it's very nice. I thought, okay. She seemed very nice, but didn't seem interested. So I left. I never heard from her again. What I didn't know was behind the scenes, she was talking to her cousin who knew me and a whole lot of other people to say, I want to meet this guy again. We finally met in February the following year. And then Pesach was in March. He came and ate at my house every night. We were engaged in June and married in September. So it kind of happened. But it was interesting. The whole idea of a marriage was like, wow, we're getting married. What does it mean to be Jewish and married? What is a Jewish marriage? What is a Jewish household? I've lived as a singleton in my house, made up my things as I went along. I know what it means to grow up in a Catholic household because I've done that all my life. I'm now growing up, we're going to have to form a Jewish bayit. How are we doing this? So every time these things come along, they forced us to up our game. It was, the wedding was amazing. Everyone thinks their wedding is amazing and they should. But for me, it was a turning point because I think it's where my family, specifically my siblings, my parents had been around, you know, I'll talk about them in a minute, actually really saw me and my community and what this meant to me. And I'm the oldest of 3 boys, and I've got a much younger sister. So my youngest brother got married first and disappointed my dad because he married a divorcee, so he couldn't marry in his church. My middle brother married a Greek Orthodox girl in the Greek Orthodox church. It wasn't in my dad's church. And me, of course, yeah, I'm going to have a chuppah in a Catholic church. So that didn't work. So I said to my sister, who was 16 years younger than me, I said, Jackie, just understand, you can't let the old man down. It's all on you. His sons have disappointed him terribly. It's all on you. And she was heard to remark as she went out of the wedding, this was so nice. I also want a Chabad wedding. I thought, this is maybe not a good idea. But anyway, be it as it may. What hit me and my wife in our first 2-3 years of marriage was reproductive issues. We just were not falling pregnant. We were both older. And it was a very dark period in our lives. You know, going to Shule and hearing baby namings or going to a bris or something like that. While you're happy for the Baalei Simcha, it was very hard for us. So we started IVF stuff, and the first IVF we did came back negative on Erev Yom Kippur. So that for me was like a hectic Yom Kippur. I had a couple of very direct words with the man upstairs. Yeah, it was quite an intense davening, and I certainly gave the Eibishter a bullet that day. And I'm sure one day he'll give me a bullet back just for being cheeky, but it was hard. And then, thank God, the second IVF took, and we had our twins, Yishai and Yocheved. And again, that now suddenly, wow, what do I do with kids? How do I bring up Jewish kids? Neither of us have a history. My wife grew up in a secular family in Durban. and it's not known to be a B'nai Brak part of South Africa. And I certainly did not grow up in a Jewish household. So what did we, it really, again, was like a hectic thing that we had to both get our heads around. What does it mean to have Jewish children, to bring up from kids? And every time it gets us to reevaluate, what are we committed to? Why are we committed to it? And how are we going to push it further? How do we bring our children up? I mean, teaching about Chagim is easy, but it was always, for me, and I think for my wife as well, we've spoken about it, was always amazing to see it through the eyes of our children. To watch their, I grew up with Christmas and a Christmas tree and Christmas presents and that kind of thing, but to watch Pesach through their eyes, to watch Sukkot through their eyes. My favorite Chagim are Pesach. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. I love Pesach. It's my best. I got cooking crazy. And I love Sukkot. I joked once. I said, it's like a Jewish Christmas tree. It's my best. I love it. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are very serious, and I love them too. But those two, they're just my favorites. So to watch it through my kids' eyes was always enlivening. I remember, like, and kids can be irritating. We've all got kids, and we know it. Like, you say to them, they were in nursery school, like at Torah Academy, the Chabad school. They'd come up and you say, "What did you do today?" "We played." "What did you play?" "Play-Doh." "Who did you play with?" "People in the class." You get nothing out of them. You're thinking, like, what am I doing? What are they learning? Are they learning anything? And then one day my wife was rushing them to school. I heard this afterwards. They were both slammed into their car seats, strapped in. And my wife says to our domestic worker, Gogo, she says, "Gogo, it'll be a miracle if we get to school on time today." And my son Yishai pipes up from the back, "No, mommy, the miracle was when the Yidden got to the Yam Suf, Hashem opened it and they walked through and Hashem drowned Paro and the Mitzrim." I'm thinking, wow, for a 4, 5-year-old, this is unbelievable. Like, it just suddenly, like, those kind of things, suddenly realize what they were taking in, which again meant, like, we have to be careful about what we're doing because they take it all in as well. For me, then going to a Jewish school was a bit scary from the point of view of my experience of CBC, just like what's it going to mean for them to go to from religious school and their father's a convert, and like what's going to happen? My kids are blonde and blue-eyed. They are our answer to Hitler. They are Jewish Aryans, and I always like take a kind of a satisfaction in, like, haha, see what happened. Let's look at my kids. They're Jewish, buddy boy. So that's where we are. The kids are now 9, and just it's always a challenge to us to up our game. They're learning, they're translating Rashis, and I'm thinking, like, I can't translate these Rashis. Like, I'm sitting with an art scroll, and it's inspirational. They inspire us all the time to do better. Maybe just a bit about my family, and then I'll ring off and people can ask questions. My approach to my conversion was, I never ever with my family said, my religion is superior to yours, your religion is junk. It was always phrased as, this is my choice, this is my path that's meaningful for me. What you guys do is meaningful for you, is your business. I was a vegetarian for 20 years. So my parents were used to me cooking my own food at home. I always prepared my own food. So it was after Rosh Hashanah, actually. When I was a student, I always used to go home on a Sunday because that's where the washing machine was. Later on, I got my own washing machine, and I would go home to see my parents. I did grow a little bit. I remember I hadn't seen them for a week. It was just before the Chagim. It was crazy. Work was crazy, and there was davening. So I think it was a Tuesday night. I went home, and I drove from Johannesburg to Irenians near Pretoria, and popped in. And I walked in, and as I walked past the dining room, I saw there was a wicker picnic basket on the dining room table. My sister was at Pretoria Girls High School, and my dad was always moaning they have to go for these school functions at night, and they have to bring shopping bags full of food and plates and knives and forks for these outdoor, and he'd always wanted to get a picnic basket. So I thought, cool, he got his picnic basket. And I walked into the family room where they were sitting, and I said, "Hey, old man, nice, you got your picnic basket, well done." He said, "No." I said, "Okay, there's a story here, what is it?" He says, "No, it's for you." I said, "Okay, tell me more." He said, "No, Mum and I had a chat about it, and we said, we don't want you eating off paper plates and things when you come home for meals, for birthdays or whatever. So we bought this picnic basket. It's got crockery and cutlery in it. So you'll bring it with you. You'll eat off normal crockery and cutlery, and you'll take it home and you'll wash it in your kitchen," because I always bought my own food. And I thought, wow, that's an unbelievable, like, just that had been 10 years of never discussing this really with my dad. My dad's a proper Irish guy. Cowboys don't cry in front of their horses. You don't discuss these emotional things. So there was his first kind of acknowledgement of, okay, this is what I'm doing and it's okay. Since then, they come to us on Shabbos, Friday night suppers. They come to us sometimes for lunch. They certainly, if they can join us for first night Yom Tov, they do. I always kind of wondered what the experience of a Pesach Seder was. They've been to one or two with us, kind of, and then they're going to Easter, kind of, what is it? I'll ask them one day, kind of what they think. But they've come to accept it. I think with getting married, made that very firm, and then having the kids. My mom used to, when the kids were small, would come and spend one day with them every week. We delayed them going to nursery school for 1 year because they were twins. They had each other, and my mom would come, and we had an amazing domestic worker looking after them. And so then my mom would be reading, she'd be reading a children's book on Purim, and she'd go, or about Pesach, she'd go, Pharaoh. And my daughter would go, no, Granny, it's Paro. These little kids would be correcting their granny, and I think through that they've come to accept where I am. I think somebody once asked my mom at a dinner, like, did they accept what I'd done? And she said, look, they trust that any decision I would make would be a good one. I wouldn't get involved in anything that is bad or evil or wrong. So while I don't think it would be their first choice that their firstborn child becomes a Jew, I think they've come to understand that it hasn't made me any worse. Hopefully it's made me better in their eyes, and they've come to accept it. So let's leave it there. You guys can ask questions. Throw it over to you, Rabbi.
Wow. Thank you very much, Pinchas, for that story. And this is the second time I've heard it, and I was just as engaged as I was the first time. So you certainly have a good way about telling your story, and just your nature is just incredible to listen to. So thank you for sharing your story with everybody. So there are quite a number of questions that come to me. They've sent it to me privately. So I'll just maybe ask a couple of questions myself first, and then put some of the questions. But again, really fascinating journey. And of course, I mean, some of the people who are asking in terms of your family relationship, but you certainly just answered that. But somebody asked, is your sister married yet?
Oh, so my sister's an interesting story. She married an Australian atheist. She lives in New York now. We'd said to her, look, I said to my sister Jack, you have to understand, we can come to the wedding reception, we can't come into the church. And then, of course, she married a guy, I don't know somewhere outside Sydney, it's some small town outside Sydney. Brendan is a really lovely guy, and they got married in a civil service on a lakeside somewhere down in the Western Cape, so we were able to go for that. Yeah, so that's, again, one of those ironies. Yeah, my poor father's out of luck on that one.
That is ironic, isn't it? So obviously, you're going through the journey. I think something that just really hit me in your talk tonight, which I didn't pick up really in the first time around, was how you're continuing to see it through different lenses, through your children. And do you feel like that's going to continue through the rest of your life as they go and bar and bat mitzvah? And do you feel like it's a continuous journey?
I think so, because for me, I can only speak for me, but a convert is called a ger, a stranger, because we don't have that history. I know what it's like to have a first communion. I don't know what it's like to have a bar mitzvah. So for me, when I watch, it's watching it. It's always one step removed, watching it through my children's eyes. Getting obviously my daughter to bati before her brother because they're twins, but like preparing for that, seeing that kind of thing. Yeah, it would be. I don't have a personal experience of what it feels like to be a 13-year-old boy in a bimmer with your voice breaking on the worst day of your life, because you've got to be doing the performance of what feels like the performance of your life, but also what it leads up to that. So yeah, I have to try and see it through those lenses. Yeah.
Now, you spoke about your process of going through the conversion in South Africa. And South Africa is a well-known conversion program. It is also quite famous for being a tough program. How did you find the experience in terms of the material? And obviously an educated man, and you've studied the Bible and all that, but did you find points in time you think this is just too complex, this is too much?
So, no. For me, it was fascinating. I was the first put into a group of a class. When I came to Rabenda, they'd already Rabbi Zekri from Durban had done a master's in sociology, and he'd studied the Gerus process and found that people in South Africa, people who are going to individual teachers, they found a situation where a woman would come for conversion, she'd marry a Jewish guy, they'd get divorced, and she would end up going back to her family, because in a divorce, what do? You go back to your support system, and she and the kids would almost like leave Yiddishkeit. Some of them would actually become Christians again. And they were trying to work out how to work against this. And what they worked at was, if they got a class situation together, we would provide each other with support, with chizuk. We'd be together. We'd be on this journey. We could explore it together. So I think Rabbi Hendler had a harder time than we did, because we gave him hell. He would bring up a topic and we would just, we'd climb in. Our class tended to be a lot older. I think the class that came after the lot younger people, our class were a lot older. I think it's interesting because in my class, I think of everybody who finished and converted, I think there's only one couple that aren't Shomrei Shabbos today. Everybody else pretty much is Shomrei Mitzvahs. I finished earlier. They want you to go through a minimum of 2 years. You go through the Chagim twice. Once it's a novelty, the second time they're wanting it, it kind of gets into you. Because I'd been around for 10 years before I officially went on the clock. I only did it in 18, I was allowed through in 18 months, but I still say it took me 10 years because it just makes me sound like a martyr.
No, but you were in it for 10 years.
Yeah.
And how do you feel do you have any involvement with the Gayris program? Do you speak to potential candidates? Do you have any influence?
Not really. Every now and again, I don't hide that I'm a Gair, so people can come and talk to me. So every so often I'll get a phone call, would you mind if this person phoned? And I say, with pleasure. The other thing is I'm happy that the South African program is a fairly staunch program, just because I don't want to question about my status. It doesn't affect my wife and kids, fortunately, but if I was a woman, it would be a big problem for my kids if someone suddenly brought into question my conversion, because that saying it's not strict enough or the Beth Din wasn't whatever,
Yeah.
So I'm happy for it to be a little bit more Taliban-y, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, good description. But I hear what you're saying. Yeah, you want it to be internationally recognized and sort of, recognized by all parts of the Jewish community.
Yeah.
And how do you find, I don't know if you've had, you sound like you had a good experience within, obviously Chabad Ilova seems to be a very warm community, but did you ever feel maybe not necessarily welcomed as if you had been born Jewish? Did you ever get that sense?
I think, no, I've always found I'm okay. When I go somewhere, I don't think many people, I think in today's conversions in South Africa, what's hard is for people of color, because there's a huge amount of people of color who are converting. And I think for them, the issue of race becomes an issue because we're pretty much a white European community with an apartheid history. So South Africa is not without those nuances. So when a black couple arrive at a shul and I don't know what we call them CSO. I don't know if you also JDL or whatever you call your security guys, but they kind of take them apart, like, who are you and what are you doing? And they're kind of thinking like, I've just gone through a very orthodox conversion. I'm way from it than you are. I keep all the mitzvahs and you pulling me aside and giving me the third degree. I think that's hard for them. I haven't had that experience. I think South Africa as a community, I don't know how Australia works, but South Africa is a very homogenous community. It's mostly Litvak. And was we're less than 0.01% of the population. So it's always kind of been quite a unified community. And with the Baal Tshuva movement, you've got families where people keep Shabbos and people are not religious, and somehow we make it work. So from that point of view, I think that's why I don't think I've ever had a problem. I think that's just the nature of the community. Yeah.
Someone sent me an interesting question, and it's interesting because I've been involved with the conversion program here in Melbourne, and I think it works in a similar way. The rabbis of shuls become mentors for people who come to your shul and convert through your program, through your shul. And someone said, and especially looking at someone like you who seems to be really engaged in your shul, in your Jewish life, but do you feel like there's ever a point, and I guess it's an interesting question because you wouldn't know what to compare it to necessarily, but do you ever feel like you're now really a frum yid and like, I don't feel like davening today? Or does somebody...
Oh, often.
Okay, so...
No, there are days where I've never had I don't have a day where I regret my decision. This is one decision. There are a few things in my life I don't regret. There are lots of other things, like we've all got things we started and never finished. This is one of the things I'm very happy that I saw through, and I still continue to see through. It's like, what do you call it? Present tense continuous. It never finishes. But I know there are days when I think to myself, it's like it's 5 o'clock in the morning, it's dark and it's freezing. Do I really, really want to get up now? And I've taken it upon myself to go to mikveh before I daven as well. So it means I've got to either take a cold skinny dip in my pool, or I've got to go down to Torah Academy and jump in the men's mikveh there, and then still make it to my shul. Thinking like, do I really need to do this? And the answer is yes, I do need to do this. This is the Kabbalah's mitzvahs I made. This is what I committed myself to. And there's, one of the things, maybe it's a weird way of answering it, but one of the things that I learned was really important for me was St. Paul, who started pretty much as the founder of Christianity. His whole model was, I'm not going to go into the whole history of Christianity, there's too many nuances there, but if you take it down to its absolute brass tacks, what he said was, you cannot keep the whole law. You can't keep all the mitzvahs. Therefore, get rid of all of them. Don't bother with them. Rather just accept Yoshka and that's it, and live that life, and that's how you'll do it. So what he said basically came down to, that's a quote, I'm misquoting the New Testament, but he says, you can't keep the letter of the law, so keep the spirit of the law. And the one thing I learned very early on in my journey was that he's got it back to front. You can't get to the spirit of the law until you've observed the letter of the law. So when we do kashrut, you're worrying about, oh my God, did I put the milk teaspoon into the meat cup? And you're worrying and you're worrying about, I remember I could have developed OCD in the first year of keeping kosher. And then started to realize, actually, no, it's not about that. It's really not about that. It's what's underneath that. What are you keeping kosher for? It's about kedusha. It's about holiness. It's not about, so you make a mistake with a spoon that can be corrected. It's not about that. And I remember walking to Shule one day and going, and I have a habit of, I basically check, I've got my wallet, I've got my keys, and I've got my cell phone. And I remember walking down to Shule and going, and having almost a moment panic, I haven't got my wallet. And then realizing, what do you need it for? You don't need it today. It's not about it. If somebody comes to my house for a cup of tea and I've run out of milk, well, I've run out of milk. That's what it is. And that's the nature of the day. What am I doing? I'm keeping Shabbos. It's not about, can I run to the shop and look after someone who needs some milk in their tea? So that's why for me, every day, even though some days it's hard, and it is hard, and I think for everybody it's hard, I will still get myself to go and do it, because that's why I'm doing it.
Beautiful. That's a really good answer. So we're obviously heading into Rosh Hashanah in a few weeks' time, in a month's time, and just wondering if you have any words of inspiration for people through COVID-19 and how to experience Rosh Hashanah in a different way. Obviously, you experienced Rosh Hashanah, for the first time as a Jew when you've converted, and it must have been an eye-opening experience first time. So, any words of inspiration for us if we have to do it differently this year?
I think for me, and maybe that goes about the whole Corona thing, is that all of this is min hashamayim. It comes from heaven, for whatever reason. And the challenge is, how do you step up to the plate and say, I'm going to make something meaningful out of this? So I don't know if shuls are going to be open or closed, or you're going to have shifts for X amount of people. Those are all practical arrangements. But I think if you can get your mind around that, this is the time that you're setting up your next year, and this is the time you want to speak to Hashem about what it's been like for you, how hard this journey through Corona has been, and share that with him, and to pray, to talk to Hashem about that, the coming year. What have you learned in this year through this, and how will that make you better next year? And how can Hashem work with you? And how can you work with Hashem for that for next year? I don't know. It's a hard question. I'm trying not to sound like a motivational speaker. But I just think it's such an important day for engaging with Hashem, and all the gates are open, and you can really, really connect with Hashem that time, that, to talk to, just to tell Hashem, how has this been for you? It's here for a reason. I think it's my personal take is, you can see it as a biblical plague, and therefore you should be sitting in a hair shirt and fasting, or you can turn around and say, well, maybe this is, I always joke and say, God, do you think now sometimes you could just send me an email to tell me when you want something from me, or you want, because you'll be driving in the traffic and you're being like, why is all of this going wrong? Just send me an email. You're God, you're omnipresent, all powerful. You can just send me an email. Maybe this is the email to say, guys, wake up. I'm here, and maybe just to talk to Hashem about that.
That is such
That's my take.
It's going to be the catchphrase, God send us an email. But no, big thank you. I think you answered that really. I found that answer really, really inspiring, honestly, to look at it through the lens of this, chat to God about it, make this the experience really, and turn Rosh Hashanah into reflecting on how it's been and how you can take the experience into the next year. So thank you for that. So just wanted to thank you on behalf of everyone. I'm receiving some beautiful messages saying that you've inspired them, and it was really an engaging and emotional talk, to be honest, to hear that story. Just one more question, and with that we'll end the official talk. But there are a few people who know you wanted to say hi to you, actually. And that is how your work. You're a clinical psychologist, as you mentioned. How does your Judaism get involved in your work? Does it play a role in your work?
Sure. It's a difficult one. When I started my practice, I had a nice WASP practice. Nice white Anglo-Saxon Protestants who didn't know more than me, who paid their bills on time, who respected what I said. And then I got the Jewish community landed on my head. It was a different experience. No, I'm being rude. I'm being facetious. I think it's hard because there are, when it comes to your fellow Yidden, there are halachas that you're responsible for. So when I'm working with Jews, it's really hard because in my mind as a psychologist, I try not to let religion come too much into my clinical practice. But I can't not let it in because it suffuses my life, and for many people it is. I think it's more scary for the patient to walk in and see the beard and the yarmulke and think, oh my God, I've just walked into a Jewish Santa Claus's office. And how do they deal with that? So people do ask me questions and I'm open about it. But for me, I made a choice a long time ago. I don't know if it's a right or wrong one, but my practice is not for Makareving people. If a guy comes and tells me he doesn't keep Shabbos, I say, fine, you know. I've had it from teenager before. The parents sent him to me because I think they wanted me to make him from, and I said, I'm not doing it. It's not going to work. He came to me and said he went and had a cheeseburger, and I didn't castigate him. I said, well, how did it taste? Was it worth the 13 rand you paid for it? You know, like that's why I have to. It's a weird balance you have to keep.
It's interesting because when I did a master's in psychotherapy and counseling, and I remember, you know, and I was a practicing rabbi at the time, and I remember, you know, in some of the workshops that we had to do, and obviously, you know, with our, you know, when we did the placement and stuff, and I remember the lecturers telling me, you know, how are you balancing it? You know, you must feel, especially when we had Jewish, co-students who would, would practice on each other doing some counseling sessions, and they were asking me, how does it feel? You know, are you trying to bring in your religion, your faith? And I think you do have to have that separation. You have to just treat the person on their merit, really.
Yeah.
Penny, hi. It's Tal. I don't know if you can see me. There's so many people, but just to add in, I had the privilege of working as a colleague with Penny in the same rooms for a year before I left, and I would sometimes get people from the community saying to me, oh, I see your colleague Pinchas, Shiel, and I would say, no, don't know who that is because I only ever knew you as Paul. Oh, yeah. And then I realized it was one and the same. So
yeah.
Yeah, well, there you go.
My birth name is Paul John, so I don't know how Catholic you get.
Very good. Well, that's one of the people who wanted to say hi to you, Pinchas.
Yeah.
How's it?
Hi.
So, you know, a big thank you to you, and we'll officially end the recording. But if anyone is more comfortable to ask without the recording on, we'll stop there. But just once again, a big thank you to you, Pinchas, for your time. And I know we're almost at 9 o'clock, so thank you for giving us an hour of your time. And Hatzlacha, and you know, have a beautiful Elul and a beautiful Yom Tov, however it may look. And regards to your mishpucha and to Rabbi Kat as well, please.
I'll definitely do that, guys. Please God, only the